Hello, welcome to Bookspin. I'm Robin, and this is The Three Body Problem by Cixin. This was originally published in Chinese in 2008, and the English translation came out in 2014. And this was a reread for me. I first read this book, I think it was about 7 years ago. It's part one of the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, which is an absolutely mind-blowing hard sci-fi series that I've been meaning to reread for quite some time now. This series left quite a lasting impression on me the first time I read these books. They are so rich in interesting and mind-bending ideas, especially the second and third books. So I'm very excited to be reading these again. And one thing that is quite notable for this book, The Three Body Problem, I think, is it was the first book to bring Chinese science fiction to mainstream attention in the West. It was the first translated work to win the Hugo Award for Best Novel in 2015. And it's had a lot of mainstream attention since then. And even though this was a reread for me, it still feels very refreshing to read science fiction from outside of the usual Western setting. It's a first contact story, it's an alien invasion story, and the cultural setting is actually integral to the development of the plot, because the way events unfold in this novel is deeply interwoven with modern Chinese history and politics. And for me personally, this adds an extra layer of interest. I think this is a very interesting topic, and I'm someone who's quite invested, culturally invested in China. My wife is Chinese, and I previously lived in China for a number of years, so this is quite interesting to me. But anyway, let's have a look at the story. I'll try not to go into too much detail. I don't want to spoil it, but I do think it's worth introducing the plot. So there are two main narrative threads that we follow throughout this book. The first storyline takes place in the past, several decades ago, largely during the cultural revolution that China went through in the 1960s and 1970s. And during these sections, we get a good sense of the madness of the times, the revolutionary fervor that China was going through, and the rise of a violent anti-intellectualism. And this has a profound effect on our POV character, whose name is Ye Wenjie. And she is a young astrophysics graduate who goes through the trauma at the start of the book of witnessing her father beaten to death by the Red Guards, who are basically young communist extremists. Her father is seen as a particularly subversive academic. He was branded a traitor to the revolution. And after his death, Ye Wenjie is also branded in this way. So because of her association with her father, she is persecuted. She's sent to do forced labor. But after a while, the authorities realized that she could be put to better use, because she's got a very impressive academic and scientific background and credentials. So the government decide that they should recruit her to work in a secret military base in a project called Red Coast. And this is an initiative that was set up ostensibly for intercepting and damaging foreign spy satellites, but whose true purpose we come to learn is actually the search for extraterrestrial intelligence out in the universe that China could perhaps make contact with. So that is the first storyline. It's very interesting, but we also have another story thread which is set in modern times, in which we follow a nanomaterials engineer in Beijing who's called Wang Miao, and he is asked by the police to help them look into a secret organization of scientists which has come to their attention. And this is following a mysterious trend of suicides that's been happening among scientific elites. So this cabal is somehow connected with this phenomenon, and Wang Miao is asked to infiltrate their group. And during his investigation, he gets drawn into a strange online virtual reality game called Three Body. And in this game, it portrays a very peculiar world on another planet that has three suns. And this planet is called Trisolaris. And the climate on this world is very chaotic, and it wavers between extreme weather patterns called stable eras and chaotic eras. And the people who live there have evolved the ability to transform their bodies during the chaotic eras as a means of survival. And this process is dehydration. That's what they call it. It's basically they turn their bodies into rolls of canvas, and this allows them to survive through hibernation. And these bodies can later be rehydrated and revived when it's safe to do so in the next stable era. So that's the three body game, and the goal of the game is for the player to seek to understand the rules of this game's world and the physics that control the interaction of the three suns in order to try and predict when the next change of era will be through the use of science. And there is in fact a much deeper meaning within the game that the creators want to communicate. And it's effectively a propaganda piece for the secret organization which I mentioned, but the true meaning will only really become clear after Wang has solved its central mystery. So we have those two storylines, and at first there doesn't seem to be much connection between the two, but gradually they do converge, and we learn how the consequences of Ye Wenjie's actions in the Red Coast base in the past relate to Wang Miao's story within the present and the meaning and the purpose of the video game. So it sounds a bit strange when I describe it, but it's very cleverly done, and I think the author does a good job of tying these threads together in a very satisfying way. This is very much a concept-driven novel, and it's on the harder scale of science fiction. There are, of course, characters and a plot, and there's world building, and these are all interesting enough in their own right, but it's really the scientific ideas and the concepts that drive the story forward. And these get explored in some detail. So the title of the book, for instance, The Three-Body Problem, refers to a real-world problem in physics and astronomy, which is basically the problem of trying to calculate the motion of three celestial bodies in space that mutually gravitate to one another. This is a real-world problem in science, and it's actually quite a headache to resolve. And this is used as a central plot device to uncovering the mystery within the three-body game. So this book does go quite heavy into the science, and some of the ideas are quite high concept. But I do think they enrich the story, and the author does a good job of explaining the ideas that the reader needs to understand. He does sometimes indulge into info dumps, which might seem a bit excessive for some readers, but I do think it's worth having some patience with these sections, because you really need to appreciate how the science, how the ideas affect the way events unfold throughout the story. And really, this is just the start of the big ideas in the series as a whole. Once you get to the Dark Forest, which is the second book, things really start to heat up, and the concepts just keep getting more and more wild and mind-bending from there. And by the time you get to the end of the third book, it gets completely bonkers, and I can't wait to continue with this trilogy. In fact, I would say that while The Three-Body Problem is definitely an impressive book, we're nowhere near the heights of what this series has to offer. Books 2 and 3 take place on a much grander scale, and this book, The Three-Body Problem, is essentially just a prologue for what is yet to come. But it is an essential part of the story. I would give this book 4 stars. It's entertaining, it's thought-provoking, and it does a great job of setting the scene for the epic Remembrance of Earth's Past saga as a whole. So this is an impressive novel in its own right, but if you do read this, you should really do yourself a favour and move on to the Dark Forest next, to fully appreciate the brilliance of this series. So I have just started rereading the Dark Forest now, and I'll probably be reviewing that soon at some point. But that's all for today. I'll be back again soon, and thank you for watching.